Hi, I'm Jess Fields. Welcome to the show. We took a few weeks off, but we're back with a great interview, a follow up interview with Dr. Ryan Burge, who we had on the show before. Burge is a professor of political science at Eastern Illinois University and a widely cited prognosticator, especially on the intersection of religion and politics. We talked about the 2020 election and who he expects to vote for both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, as well as what he thinks is the key to victory for both candidates. Regardless of your view, I'm sure you'll find this to be an interesting interview with Dr. Ryan Burge, a pastor and professor of political science at Eastern Illinois University. Joining me now again for a second time is Dr. Ryan Burge, a professor of political science at Eastern Illinois University. He tweets at Ryan Burge, and he helped discover the phenomenon of religious nuns in America. We interviewed Dr. Burge a couple months ago. Dr. Burge, welcome back to the show.
So glad to be here, Jess. Appreciate it.
I had so many people comment on our interview from last time and ask me, like, where did you find this guy? Like, why have I not heard about this stuff? And so a lot of people that just were listening to that, they started looking into you and they were like, this is incredible, these charts and graphs. So obviously you're still tweeting out charts and graphs, but for people that maybe aren't familiar with you, could you give us just a real quick biography of who you are, where you've been, what you've done?
So I have a PhD in political science from Southern Illinois University, graduated in 2011. I am an assistant professor of political science at Eastern Illinois University. I've been there for this is my 8th year. I'll start there. And I am the pastor of First Baptist Church of Mount Vernon, Illinois. And I've been the pastor there it'll be 14 years in October. I live in rural Southern Illinois with my wife and 2 kids. And I haven't been to my office since March 16th of 2020. So almost 5 months of being away from campus. So charts and graphs are what I do. I'm a scholar of religion and politics. I'm a quant, an unabashed, unashamed quantitative scholar of religion and politics. So I become like the bat signal. Hey, does anybody have any data on this thing that evangelicals do or don't do? And someone will tag me and here we go. Here comes a graph. If I have it, I can make it really quick. And usually I'm around, not always, but most of the time I have the data ready. I can knock out a graph in 5 or 10 minutes and, keep the conversation going. So that's sort of what I've become known for online is being the graph guy and the data guy when it comes to religion and politics in America.
So I guess given that and last conversation we had, I mean, I would say to anybody listening to this or watching this, go back and watch or listen to that interview we did a couple months ago. It's like 2 hours long, but I mean, it's just one of the top conversations of my life, really. It was awesome. We went through a lot of your work on religious nuns and where they came from. So I don't want to rehash that. Today, I really want to kind of go through some of what you do that is perhaps a little bit more pertinent to the current time that we're in politically, which is to say, where are people voting? Where do these voters come from? Obviously, at this moment that we're doing this interview, this could change at any time. At this moment, Vice President Biden has not announced his vice presidential pick. And obviously, as the nominee of the Democratic Party, is gaining a lot of media attention, and President Trump running for re-election. I mean, let's just kind of start with the baseline. How do religious voters stack up in America? Who votes for Republicans? Who votes for Democrats? Where are the swing groups? Let's go through and break some of that down, Dr. Burge.
Okay, so the Republican Party is quite honestly the party of white Christians in America today. So about 75% of people who identify as Republicans today also identify as white and Christian. Okay, so they have become the party of really white culture and Christian culture in America. And the Democratic Party, the counterpoint is they've become the party of the religiously unaffiliated, atheist, agnostic, nothing in particular, but also some Hispanic evangelicals, most Black Protestants, 90% of Black Protestants, but even Black Catholics. So if you're not a white and a Christian, there's a very good chance that you're a Democrat. And if you are a white and a Christian, there's a very good chance that you're Republican. And I was talking to someone just the other day, and I said, if I was running a campaign, I'd much rather run a campaign, politics aside, my own personal opinion aside, I'd a lot rather run a campaign for a Republican because they have one note they need to hit: white Christianity over and over and over again. A Democrat, on the other hand, has to appeal to Black Protestants who are incredibly religiously engaged, go to church almost as much as white evangelicals do, believe the Bible's literally true, don't love abortion, don't love gay marriage, but at the same time also appeal to atheists who 95% of them believe in gay marriage and 90% of them believe in abortion on demand. So you're trying to really hit this large spectrum of policy positions when the Republican Party really has to keep hitting on social conservatism, fiscal conservatism, white politics, white identity. And the Democrats, boy, they have to get, a coalition of everybody else energized and engaged. And there's not a single candidate in America today, including Joe Biden, who really hits all those notes and brings all those people in at one time. Trump is really the embodiment of what white Christians do, because he talks about if the Democratic Party wins, Christianity will be outlawed. He's a friend of faith. Look what I've done for people of religion. Democrats can't have a unified message like that unless it's we don't like Trump. I mean, that's their unifying message right now. So white Christians and everybody else, that's sort of become American politics when it comes to religion today.
So, Dr. Burge, I want to ask you about the shape of this Democratic coalition that you're talking about, because Joe Biden's campaign just announced like $220 million of spending across a variety of competitive states, but also a couple of states like Texas, where I am, and Georgia, that are traditionally Republican states. Let's talk a little bit about kind of where this Democratic coalition comes from and kind of like how it got to where it is, because I'm kind of curious about, like you're saying, it's tough to piece together. I mean, I guess starting back with the maybe 40, 50 years ago, the Democratic Party coalition began to shift and the Republican Party coalition began to shift. Could you kind of go back in time and kind of draw us through how that all happened?
So it's a push and a pull. Okay. So really, if you want to trace the modern Democratic Party back to a specific point, obviously doing this is reductive and historians will yell at me, but whatever.
Let them yell.
Yeah, let them yell. So the Civil Rights Act was probably the inflection point where the Democratic Party became the party of minority rights in America. I mean, Lyndon Johnson, he was a Texan, he was a Democrat, but he wasn't a liberal in, sort of a modern sense of the word. But he understood that if the Democratic Party wanted to move forward, it had to do so with being a party of big tent and multiracial. And he even said when he signed the Civil Rights Act that he basically gave away the South, because at that point, there were Dixiecrats, conservative Democrats in the South who voted for Democrats, but really had a lot of racist attitudes, were not in favor of integrating schools and that kind of thing. But they were FDR Democrats who sort of hung around. But the Democratic Party then started moving away from them and moving towards a party of multiracial integration, things like that, in the 1960s. Now, as a backlash to that, or I think as a way to accelerate that, Nixon did the Southern Strategy when he was elected in 1972, where he basically preyed on these white people's concerns over race in the early 1970s, saying, I am not in favor of busing, which was a big deal in those days to integrate schools. He said, I'm not in favor of busing. He was not so overt about saying things like, he said that he was not opposed to integrating schools. He just didn't believe in any sort of the tactics that you would use to integrate the schools. So
Nixon was kind of trying to strategically kind of have it both ways. In a
exactly.
sense. Because he still had, I guess, the Northeastern Republicans and like the California Republicans who weren't as maybe, quote unquote, culturally conservative or whatever as the Southerners. But he had to also appeal to the Southerners. And I mean, of course, Nixon ended up, sweeping the map. I mean, he won in a dramatic landslide, right?
Absolutely. And so that is what those two things. And then, okay, so Civil Rights Act in mid-1964, 1965, Southern Strategy in the early 70s, and then 5-6 years later, the religious right really takes off in the wake of Roe, okay? And that drives this narrative of the Republican Party, and the religious right, by the way, is almost entirely a white phenomenon, okay? So that the Southern Strategy sort of nudged a lot of white conservative Democrats to the Republican Party, but the religious right and the moral majority kind of kept them there and held them there for the future, because the South is culturally evangelical. I mean, even if you're not really, you don't go to church a bunch, you still sort of subscribe to abortion is bad and gay marriage is not allowed and these kind of things. So what we've seen is the Democratic Party then, as a result, became the party of white people who aren't Christians necessarily. So today in modern America, half of white liberals are religiously unaffiliated. Half of white liberals.
Half?
Half. Think about that for a second. Half
But
of
how
the
many? But how many people identify as? I mean, who would be like white liberals? It's not a huge group, is it?
No,
Or
it's not. So the liberal label has really gotten like a toxic attachment to it. People are much more likely to, I think it's about 20% of Americans identify as liberal or somewhat liberal or liberal, right? So it's not a huge block. But, you know, if we talk about the woke left in America, like the tweeting, canceling woke left, half of them are religiously unaffiliated. So I think that drives some of the media narrative, especially on left-leaning news outlets, is half those people aren't Christians. If they're white, there's a 50-50 shot there are none. I mean, think about that, right? So that sort of drives them. And I think that drives the narrative of a lot of those reporters and media types are completely unfamiliar with what it means to be a person of faith and all the nuances that go with that. And so I think they mischaracterize what evangelical Christianity is, thinking that they're all hardcore Republicans. Now, 51% of them do identify as Republicans, but they also assume that evangelicals are overtly political at church, which is empirically not true. Almost all evangelical pastors avoid politics like the plague because they realize the people in the pews don't like that. So I think that's what's driving a lot of this sort of this bifurcation is the media doesn't really understand evangelicalism on the ground. And interestingly enough, some of the best religion reporters in today, like Sarah Pulliam Bailey at the Washington Post, grew up as an evangelical in Indiana and went to Wheaton College in, Wheaton, Illinois. So she knows evangelicalism. And you can tell by the way she writes her stories. And Emma Green's like that at The Atlantic too. They write their stories differently because they understand evangelicalism from the inside. An outside reporter cannot do that because they just don't understand the nuances of that. So I think that's a lot of the divide. I call it the God gap. Okay. The Democratic Party is becoming more and more the party of the nuns and the Christian minorities, racial minorities, and the Republican Party is becoming the party of Christianity. And that's sort of and it's growing every year. And there are fewer and fewer people in the middle.
So it's very interesting because, and I at this point, I should point out, we spoke a lot about this in the previous interview we did, but you're really like, I mean, I think you self-identify as kind of more of a centrist or a neutral, party, although some like our religion reporter, Terry Mattingly, he says you're a progressive.
Exactly.
Pastor.
Exactly.
So,
I am.
But I know you know Terry, but so I mean it's kind of like, I mean you're definitely not, it should be said, you're not like a hyper conservative though, evangelical.
No, but I'm not a woke liberal either.
Right. But so your observations though come from an interesting place. So I mean, like, one of the things that we spoke about previously is where do people like you fit in? I mean, where do the quote unquote sort of more moderate, like mainstream Christians in America, which, as you've identified repeatedly, is a shrinking group, like really fast shrinking group. Where do they go? I mean, are they all Democrats or some of them Republicans? What's the situation?
Yeah. So we want to talk about centrist Christians. Okay. People who are like in the middle of the political spectrum. It's really mainline Protestants, which are like your United Methodists, your Episcopalians, your Presbyterians, your Lutherans, some Lutherans, not all Lutherans. They used to be 30% of the population in 1976. Today they're 10% of the population. I mean, they've lost 2/3 of their numbers. That group so the problem with mainline Protestant Christianity is it's dying and it's aging at the same time because those two things are happening kind of interchangeably. And I will say this, people who live on the coast, like for instance in New England, New York City reporters, don't understand. If you are a moderate or left of center and want to be a Christian in most rural towns in America, I'm not joking when I say this, there is no viable church option for you. And that's not hyperbolic at all. Okay.
No viable church option.
No, there is none. If you want to be Protestant Christian in rural America and you are left of center politically, there is not a church that I would say today that is anywhere on the growth trajectory or even staying steady. So for instance, like the Episcopalians are going to be majority Democrat. Now, not overwhelmingly majority, but probably 60% Democrats, okay? In my town, they don't even meet anymore because they can't find a priest, and all of them are over the age of 70. Like, that's not a viable option. So a young church that is large, that is growing, that has kids, that has programs, non-denominational Christianity, mega churches are almost always going to be right of center, if not very right of center politically at the same time. So a young person, let's say in your early 30s, living in rural America, has a couple of young kids, you and your wife or your husband want to find you a nice church that doesn't preach the gospel of MAGA, but is also, that's growing, that's not old. You really, honest to God, don't have a choice. You don't have a good choice for sure. and you're probably not going to go because you don't want to go to a church where you hear about, the goodness of the Republican Party and how abortion is evil and how gay people shouldn't get married. But you want to find a community of people of faith who are moral, who do good things, who help the community. Good luck. I mean, you are literally locked out in most of America. I think it's one of the reasons why, by the way, that Christianity is declining in America so rapidly is because people like that are now being pushed to being nuns when they used to have tons of options 30 years ago.
So all right, you went there. So now I'm gonna ask you about a tweet, and I will, if you're watching this, I'm gonna be bringing the graph up right now.
Sure.
This is something I noticed you tweeted out on August 1st. And if you don't follow Dr. Burge and you have any interest in this stuff, you've got to follow him because, I mean, you just create all these incredible graphs. Here's what the tweet says. And if you're watching this, I've got this up. Here's a red alert for religious people in the U.S. When do retired people outnumber those of childbearing age in a faith tradition? For mainline Protestants, it was 20 years ago. For evangelicals, Catholics, and Black Protestants, the shift is happening right now. And then you have this graph, which basically, if you're listening on the podcast, it shows that evangelicals, when are the old outnumbering the young? You've got the under 40 line for evangelicals is declining, and the over 60 line is rising. For main lines, it crossed some time ago in the late 90s, it looks like. Black Protestants, they meet. So the over 60, under 40 is kind of like it's meeting now. And then Catholics, it looks like over 60 has grown. And then Jews also, it looks like over 60 has grown. And the only places where this is not true on your graph is those of another faith. So presumably Muslims,
Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, Mormons,
but not Jews, because you do have Jews as over 60, and then religiously unaffiliated. The over 60 continues to be a smaller number than the younger, and unclassified. So based on this, I mean, let's just kind of go into what does this mean? Does it mean that among basically almost all Christian faiths now, the older people are kind of taking over? And then I would ask you as a follow-up within that to also address, is that not maybe partially the demographics of the country maybe explains that? I mean, is it?
Yes and no. I mean, the demographics that we are getting older as a country, right? Because fertility has gone down in America. I mean, that's without a doubt true. But that doesn't explain the differential between the different groups, right? I would expect it to make every line get much tighter, and it's not. For instance, half of the nuns today are still under the age of 40. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, they're growing rapidly. So 40% of millennials are religiously unaffiliated now. 40%. And it's 38% of Gen Z, and they're just coming into adulthood right now. So, if we look at numbers like that, you start seeing, wow, like the nuns have a long tail. They have a long future that is not gray. Evangelicals have a long future that's gray. Catholics have a long future that's gray. But what this really projects in the future is, holy cow, you're not going to have a lot of kids come up in the faith. So if a faith group wants to grow or wants to stay stable, it has to keep the people that are born into the tradition, okay, and replace people who leave or die. That's how you stay stable. There's no other way. You got to recruit people or keep people that replace every person that dies or goes away. If you've got the same number of people who are over 60 as under 40, that means it's almost impossible to replace everyone who dies because you don't have any people having kids in your congregation anymore, right? You recruit in a long, significant way, which doesn't really happen in American religion, okay? I don't think that evangelicals, for all their worth, have never really seen huge growth because they've gathered people in as they've kept people in as they've gone through. So these traditions are, so like mainline, look at mainline, for instance. In 1998, the old outnumbered the young, and look at them today. They went from 30% to 10%, and there's really no hope of a recovery there.
10%?
Yeah, 10% of America.
For mainline Protestants?
1 in 10 Americans are mainline Protestants today. 1 in 10. They used to be literally, okay, so here's what's interesting.
No, but 10%, but I mean, but in terms of like old outnumbering the young.
Oh, no. So
Okay.
today, it is 50% of mainline Protestants are over the age of 60 and 18% are under the age of 40.
18%. So,
Yeah,
and then
18%.
they're only 10% of the population, but they used to
Exactly.
be much, much larger, like what, 30% or something?
Yeah, 30. So think about 18% of 10% of the population, right? So you're talking about 2% of America are mainline Protestants under the age of 40.
That is astonishing. So you walk
Yeah.
into, I mean, if you just walk into any old Episcopal church or United Methodist church,
Mhm.
you're going to see very few young people, is what that really means.
Almost none. I mean, almost none. And you know what? If you're a young couple that comes in with that and you see that, you're going to be like a Homer Simpson, meme where you just turn around, put your hat back on, and walk back out. Because
That's
that's
what I was going to ask you. Is it's like, I mean, if a young person, let's say, is growing up in the Episcopal Church or the United Methodist Church
Mhm.
or United Churches of Christ would be considered a mainline.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I mean, so
Yes.
if you're in
Yeah.
one of these denominations, do younger people kind of leave partially because it's like also, I mean, they can't find a spouse, there's no young like group for them, there's, I
Mhm.
mean, it's like they're kind of boxed out, or what's the,
Yeah.
I mean, what's the reason that people are leaving, I guess, is kind of, we talked a little bit about it last time, but obviously it does have some effect with, I mean, there's a political, parallel to this as well, I know, but
Yeah. No, so I think that it's a couple things. I think if you're an evangelical, here's what you'd say. It's because they don't believe in anything. They have a watered down gospel that doesn't really preach the gospel and the salvation power of Jesus Christ. That's the evangelical line. If it's true or not, I won't make a normative statement about that. Sociological, I'll say this. If you're liberal in America today, it's hard to be a liberal white Christian in America today when all your liberal friends who are white are not Christians, they're nuns, or they're exploring spiritual but not religious, they're Hindus or they're Buddhists or whatever. So you are sort of drawn, because Christianity is sort of has a default position in America of being conservative. So it's hard to push back against that. I think most of those kids left. 40% of liberals today are unaffiliated. That tells you a lot about what's going on in America. I just don't think there's a strong reason to stay for a lot of these people. Plus the fact the kids these days don't join stuff as much because they don't feel as social as their parents did, because they don't need to go to church to do social stuff. They can tweet, they can Facebook, they can Instagram, and all that stuff too, which sort of replaces in a very poor way socialization. So I think it's all those things together are driving people away from the main line. And it's a death spiral, to be completely honest with you.
so as I look at this graph, and I mean, we're kind of talking in the context of election 2020.
Sure.
Is this group of people, this 10%, I mean, are they part of the swing vote supposedly that, Trump or Biden could win it and it would kind of mean everything? Or is it just kind of like, yeah, the Democratic Party has the majority of these people, or the Republican Party has, or does it depend on the state? I mean, I suppose in some states, maybe it would be different than in other states.
Sure. Yeah. Like an Episcopalian in New England is going to be a liberal. It's going to be a Democrat, right? But an Episcopalian in Southern Illinois or Indiana might be a Republican. So, for instance, in the last 3 elections, the white mainline vote has gone for the Republican 55% in 2008, 57% in 2012, and 55.6% in 2016. It's a misnomer to think, by the way, that mainline equals liberal. I mean, at the top, and this is what Terry and I go back and forth on all the time. The liberal,
You're talking about Terry Mattingly.
yes, Terry Mattingly,
yeah,
yes, because
right.
when he uses the term liberal mainline back to back almost always, it is liberal at the elite level. So at the denominational level, most pastors in those congregations are liberals. They definitely put out liberal policy positions. But if you look at the laity level, mainline Protestants have always been to the right of center. Okay, they've always identified more closely with the Republican Party than with the Democratic Party. And now a lot of that has to do, by the way, with their country club Republicans, which means they don't like government. They don't want government to have high taxes and regulations. But really, at the end of the day, if you want to smoke a little weed, or if you want to marry a guy and you're a guy, that's really shouldn't be the government's place, right? So they're more like libertarian style Republicans. There has been a trend. I think Trump's pushed some of them towards the Democratic Party just because of how extreme he is, and they don't really buy into extremism as much as evangelicals do. But I think by and large, white mainline Protestants in America today are also right of center, not as far as evangelicals, but definitely slightly to the right of center.
So I want to challenge you just a little bit, although there may not be an inconsistency. But I don't know if this is new data that you've made these charts off of. But several months ago, when I interviewed you, I remember
Yep.
you were very emphatic that particularly evangelicals, there's a resilient number of them, and they're not really declining. And you didn't seem to believe
hmm
that the nuns were, as a group, or the unaffiliated, were really going to grow that much. I mean, in
hmm
America in the future. Have you
Yep.
changed your view on that?
I actually had a conversation with a guy just yesterday from an atheist organization in Canada. He asked me that exact same question. What is America going to look like in 50 years? I think that the nuns in America today are, depending on how you ask the survey question, between 25 and 30%. I think in 50 years, they're going to be about 40%. 40 to 45% is where they're going to top out at. And the reason I say that is because millennials have topped out at 40%, and it looks like Gen Z are going to find it like nestle right around that spot as well. I think what America's going to look like is probably 50% Christian, okay, Catholic and Protestant and Orthodox. Shout out to Terry Mattingly and you and, Rod and everybody else. And then 10% other faith groups. So those are Mormons, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, and everybody else that falls in that category. And then 40% none. So 50, 10, 40 is really what America is going to look like probably in 50 years. I think we're going to be consistently Christian for a very long time, and I just don't see the nuns ever getting above 50% in my lifetime. I might be wrong, but that's just what I think I see in the data.
So just kind of rolling through the amazing Ryan Burge Twitter here, which is its own political science class, August 2nd, right after that one we just talked about. You
Yep.
said, is America a Christian nation?
Mhm.
Statistically, the United
Mhm.
States is still majority Christian, but the exact percentage of Christians varies significantly based on survey method in question. And then you said it could be as high as 71%
Yep.
GSS or as low as 57.4%. That seems really low. I mean, what is that? That's quite a spread there. What is the
Yeah.
difference in methodology that comes to those numbers?
It's two things. The GSS is a survey where you actually are talked to a survey person. They're in person. Okay, so it's a face-to-face survey, which most people still consider to be the gold standard of surveying. It's also incredibly expensive to do it that way, by the way. That's why no one does it like that anymore, because it just costs an insane amount of money to get a sample. But the GSS is funded by the NSF, so they have money to do it. The average person does not. The other survey I use is called the Cooperative Congressional Election Survey, and it's done online. And I think that when you take a survey online, you are more likely to actually say what you are religiously, not what you want people to think you are. So if you are a marginally attached Christian in the GSS and they ask you in person what you are, you're gonna be like, I'm a Protestant. If you're in the CCES and they ask you that, no one's over your shoulder looking at you. So you're like, yeah. The other part of that, which is really key, is when they ask the question in the GSS, they give you 5 options, and one is no religion. Okay. In the CCS, they give you 3 options for being a nun: atheist, agnostic, or a group called nothing in particular. And I think when people hear that term, nothing in particular, people who are marginally attached Christians who really don't feel that close to Christianity go, yep, that's me. I'm kind of the shrug category of American religion. I just kind of go, yeah, nothing in particular. And here's something funny. 1 in 5 Americans today are nothing in particular. 20% of Americans today are, which is tied for the largest religious group in America today with Catholics and evangelical Protestants.
So we're going to talk about how they vote in a minute. But I want to nail this down. Are you saying that the CCES, in other words, the 57% number for the number of Christians in America, you're saying that's more accurate because it's a blind survey, and then people want to look? I mean, do people want to appear as though they have a faith? I mean, is there still that stigma attached to the nun thing? I mean, when people are standing in front of someone asking them these questions, they're like, yeah, I really need to say that I'm a Protestant, or else what will this person think of me? I mean, does that explain 14% difference between these figures?
I don't think it explains all of it. I think the response options explains more of it than the survey delivery method, but I think it does explain some of it. I will say this: I think the bias towards being a person of faith has declined over time. So I think that's happening less now than it did 20 years ago, let's say.
Do we have statistics on that? Do we have like a survey of like how much people feel it's important that you affiliate with religion or something? Or
they're going to lie on that too.
Right. So there's really no way to get, I mean, you're really talking about people's psyche, and you really have to take a guess at some point about where
Yeah, listen, the
Wow.
APOR, the American Association of Public Opinion Researchers, this is their entire lives, like trying to figure out how to ask people, have you had, promiscuous sex? Like, do you do drugs? Do you
Right.
do you smoke weed? Do you cheat on your wife? Are you racist? Do you go to church? Like, these are the
Right.
things people lie about consistently. If you were going to
Right.
pin me down, here's what I would say. GSS says it's 71, CCS says it's 57. If you split the difference there, you're right around 2/3. And I think that's probably what the actual number is mid 60s. I think probably 2/3 of Americans today identify as Christian still, which means that 1/3 of Americans does not identify as Christian.
Okay. Okay. So going back to the Democratic coalition,
Yeah.
I think, as you mentioned in the beginning, there certainly is a large number of people in the Democratic coalition from a religious perspective that would say, I'm nothing in particular, or I don't have a religious affiliation, or they're
Yeah.
just maybe be bolder and say they're an atheist or agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
So where do they tend to vote? I mean, are they all Democrats? Do some of them vote Republican still? What's kind of the shape of that nuns group that you define as about 1/3 of the population?
Yeah, so 31.4% in 2018 of the nuns, that's atheist, agnostic, and nothing in particular together. 5.9% are atheists, 5.9% are agnostic, and about 20% are nothing in particular. Add them up to get 31.5. Atheists are as liberal as you get of a religious group in America today. They are as strong a coalition around the Democrats as the Black Protestants are. They're just slightly smaller in size, but they're growing pretty rapidly. They were 3.5% in 2008, and they're almost 6% by 2018. So we're seeing they could double in size in 15 years, which is, I mean, significant. They're larger than Jews are now, by the way, and they're atheists. In 2016, 80% of them voted for Hillary Clinton. So, I mean, it's a strong Democratic coalition. Agnostics are also about 5.8, 5.9% of the population. They are still, they're a left-leaning group, but not as strong as atheists are. I always think, like, in my mind, I think agnostics are like atheists light, right? They're like slightly less liberal, slightly less democratic, slightly more towards the middle. So in 2016, 68% of agnostics voted for Hillary Clinton. So 10 points less, okay? But now, here's the important group that no one talks about, and I don't know why, but because they should. The nothing in particular group, what we just talked about, one in 5 Americans.
The shruggers, the people that just kind of like, whatever.
Yes. The shruggers are so important, and no one talks about them. They are 20% of America. Okay, 1 in 5 Americans. Wow. And they've grown from 15% in 2008 to 20% in 2018. 5 points in 10 years is a lot in American religious demography. Okay, sure. That's the size of almost the atheist group by itself, just the growth, 5-point growth. So,
and they're twice the size. I mean, just to put it in context, what we said earlier, we're talking about. This group is twice the size of all of the mainline Protestants in America, all the Episcopals, all the United Methodists. We see these churches all over the street corners, but there are twice as many people that say nothing in particular.
Exactly. And they are slightly smaller than evangelicals and slightly smaller than Catholics, probably right in that 22, 23 range. They're 20, 22, 23, right in there. So they're very large. But here's what's interesting about them. They have the lowest level of educational attainment of any religious group in America today. Only 21% of them have a 4-year college degree, okay, which is insanely low. When you look at evangelicals, it's 40%. You look at atheists, it's almost 60%, okay? So they're very highly uneducated. So we know that means they're less likely to turn out to the polls because education is highly correlated with voter turnout, okay? So they're not motivated. But here's what's interesting. So when Obama's election in 2008, he got 70% of this vote, the nothing in particular vote. In his re-election in 2012, he got 65% of this vote. And in 2016, Hillary Clinton only got 55% of this vote. Okay?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it went from 70 to 55 in 2 elections. Okay.
Well, is it fair to say, I mean, that immediately sparks the question, is that why she lost?
It's definitely something to do with the fact that she lost. Okay. I will say the agnostic vote went 10 points more for against Clinton. Okay. So the agnostic vote in 2012 was 79.1 for Obama. It was 68.1 for Hillary Clinton in 2016. So they lost 10 points there too. So you can see the slippage across all these religious groups. But when your group is 20% of the population and you lose 10 points of 20%, that's 2% of the voters. I mean, that's a big old hunk of America that went towards Donald Trump. And that's probably, so these people we talk about, the people who gave Trump the election are rural voters in places like Michigan,
Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Right.
That's it. And you
And
know
there's
what?
a lot of these, and there's probably a lot of these nothing in particulars in those states who are working class people.
You got it.
Is that how you kind of define it?
Yes. In my mind, they are a guy who went to high school, graduated, probably works in the factory down the road or like the small shop down the road, got married, probably has a couple kids, makes $40,000 a year, doesn't really do that well financially.
But is there proof? I mean, it's easy to imagine that. Obviously, that is kind of the narrative on, Trump appealed to, the average union person that would traditionally vote Democrat and all this. But is that true? I mean, is that really why he won those states? I mean, is there something of proof about that?
Not really. I mean, it's all anecdotal, really. It's hard to pin, because here's the thing. You have to look at individual voters and you have to track them from election to election, which is impossible to do. Like, you need a panel survey of like 100,000 people, which would literally cost millions of dollars that no one has or no one's willing to give you. So we can't track that at the individual level. But if we look at places where Trump did much better than Obama did in 12 and 8, you can see it's these rural parts of America that are sort of hollowed out, have experienced the brain drain, right? Where people who got education left because there's no jobs for them. I think those are the kind of people who got left behind by America. And so those people, and this is so interesting. I think this is so important. These people are the most checked out members of society. They are the least likely to go to a political meeting. They're the least likely to go to a protest or a rally. They're the least likely to vote of any of these nun groups. And they don't go to church because they're nothing in particular. They didn't go to college because that's another social activity, right? They just feel so disconnected from American society at large. And I think in a lot of ways, they're scary, because I think this is where like the QAnons come from, groups like this, right? The conspiracy theorists, because they're trying to believe in something because society's let them down. I really think we need to pay more attention to the nothing in particulars, because they're grasping for something that they're not getting in American society.
I gotta say, what you're saying reminds me of, you recommended, I think off air actually, a podcast to me, and I'm blanking on it, about the YouTube, the wormhole. What's it called?
It's the Rabbit Hole on the New York Times. Yeah,
the Rabbit Hole. That's a really interesting podcast that you recommended to me, which I would commend to anybody. And I mean, it's the New York Times, so they take kind of a lofty approach, but it is a very interesting story of some people that kind of go on the internet and then they kind of go down this rabbit hole. And my favorite story on there was a guy who the New York Times reporters had found, and he was like on YouTube, and I guess he was unemployed for a period of time.
Yep.
He watched an enormous number of YouTube videos, and he let the reporters go back through his entire YouTube history, which, I mean, that's something right there. And they found that he had actually like literally gone across the entire political spectrum a couple of times, gone from being a far left to far right, back to far left. I mean, it's just like all these different. How many people do you think are in that position where they kind of bounce back and forth? And I mean, and what effect do those people really have on elections? Because I mean, that guy probably wouldn't vote. I mean, I don't want to judge that individual, but I just don't think that people like that are voting, are they?
No, I think that they're the checked out portion of the population.
They're checked out, right.
They're just checked out. They're disconnected from every sort of institution of society, educationally, religiously, and everything else, right? And they're unemployed. So even, financially, they're checked out. Sure. I don't know how large it is today, but I'm going to tell you this, it's growing rapidly. And older people in America completely underestimate the impact of YouTube on the way that people think politically. Even things like conspiracy theories, QAnon, vaccine refusal, flat earth, all that stuff is driven in large part by the internet, largely, but YouTube specifically. I don't think the average 55-year-old in America knows there is an entire generation who watches YouTube for 4 to 6 hours a day. I mean, there are people right now watching YouTube because it hits that algorithm and just gives you more and gives you more, and it auto plays the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And man, the thing is, the media, I mean, you can call it the mainstream media or whatever you want to call it. At least they have guardrails, okay, most of them. They're not going to put on a flat earther or an anti-vaxxer or whatever, because those are just, out of bounds, right? But YouTube, there's basically no guardrails on YouTube, and you can have the most nutty, wild conspiracy theory, and you get to present that to a viewer without any sort of disclaimer or warning or filter or anything else. And people then buy into that, not just because of that, but then they also buy into the fact that the mainstream media is trying to keep this away from us, right? They're trying to censor free speech on the internet, and that's terrible. I think that makes it worse because you build up this layer where you say, oh, this has to be the truth because the media won't tell you what's really going on. They're actively fighting against this, right? And so that makes you even more entrenched in it. And I think like QAnon is like a perfect example of that, man. It is so far down the rabbit hole, and those people aren't coming back because they believe that everyone's out to get them and everything is a conspiracy.
But I mean, to be fair here, I mean, a lot of what you're mentioning would be like maybe phenomena on the right, I mean, things that you're talking about on the right, but there's a lot of people on the left probably that watch YouTube all the time too, right? So, I mean, but how do you break that out? I mean, do people that, let's say, are addicted to YouTube, do they vote a certain way? Do we know anything about their voting behavior?
We don't, because they're so young, right? Like YouTube is only really like 10 years old, like as a phenomenon, right?
Sure,
and really,
that's true.
older people don't buy into it the way that younger people grew up with it. Like I'm 38 and I watch a little bit every once in a while. Like I might get a little, maybe 20, 30 minutes a day. And it's usually like informational stuff or like archival footage or whatever I'm working on at the time.
Right.
My kids, 80% of their viewing is YouTube. They're 6 and 8 years old. I mean, if I worked for a network right now, I would be losing my mind because in 30 years, no one's going to watch ABC, CBS, NBC. They're just
that's true. I mean, I guess if I can say, because I'm, obviously I'm fairly similar in age to you.
Yeah.
I'm 32. So those of us who are old enough to remember when Seinfeld was on the air, maybe we could say, people are moving away from all of that. Now everyone's consuming, but it seems like that would have a broad effect on the political climate. I guess maybe what you're saying is we just don't have the data for it at this point.
No, but you made a good point though about, like I was mentioning right wing. Here's an interesting, anti-vax started as a left-wing conspiracy theory, right? Pharmaceutical companies are out to get you, big business is getting out to get you. But you know what's happened in the last couple of years? The right has co-opted anti-vax as a right, as this is big government trying to tell you what to do now. So what's interesting about YouTube is it can co-opt a conspiracy theory and push it another direction. So now the anti-vax lobby is far left, crunchy, hippies, but also far right anti-government types at the same time. So, when these conspiracy theories get out in the wild, they sort of morph into something else. And we don't fully understand what that's going to look like because this is so new. We've never seen this before in American media. So we don't know what this is going to look like in 10 more years, especially.
I'm going to skip asking you about the vaccination stuff because I think that's a rabbit hole we don't want to go down. At some point, I do want to talk about vaccinations with folks because I think there is a substantial number of people that maybe they're not necessarily against vaccinations. I mean, but they maybe believe in having people choose or something like that, right? So I mean, that's a complicated issue. I can understand. There's a lot of different opinions on those things, but there's no doubt. I mean, if you spend enough time on YouTube, you find all kinds of wild stuff. I mean, that's true. I want to go and ask you about kind of where we are right now and what you think is going to happen in terms of the actual like shaking out. I mean, at this point, we're a few months away from finding out depending on who you listen to, finding out what the country's going to look like for decades. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's a lot of people talking that way. I mean, I don't know. Of course, maybe they talk that way before every election. They do. But there's no doubt this is an important election. And President Trump clearly has people in solid camps, it seems like, for or against him. So right now, as we speak, the Real Clear Politics average, I just pulled it up, is 49.1% Biden, Vice President Joe Biden, 42.7% President Donald Trump. Yep. And I don't have it right here, but I've seen comparisons of this versus like where President Obama was, President Bush was. Obviously, most incumbent presidents win re-election. Dr. Burge, as a political scientist, kind of guide us through where President Trump is versus history, where he is versus what you feel like or the data that would support or not support maybe a theory for his re-election. Yeah, if you would ask me this in, let's say, January, what I think is going to happen, I think you did ask me this. I can't remember. I would say that I would have thought like 55-45 Trump's going to win, like 55% chance that Trump's going to win, 55-60%. Because the economy was roaring along. I think we may have spoken about it, and I think you were more, I mean, the power of incumbency, as I recall, you mentioned. I mean, listen, the economy was roaring, unemployment was super low, GDP was growing rapidly, everyone was sort of getting ahead, stock market was doing great.
Trump had high unfavorables, which is really interesting for a guy who had a roaring economy first term. But he's also an incumbent. All right. Incumbency, it's really hard to unseat an incumbent anyway, let alone the president. It doesn't happen very often. Okay. It happened with George H.W. Bush in 92. It happened with Jimmy Carter in 1980, but it's rare. Okay. I mean, you just have the natural advantage to win re-election. So the fundamentals in January pointed strongly towards Trump winning or winning re-election, beating Biden, whoever it was going to be in January. I think now the polling right now shows clearly that Trump is losing by a lot in the states that he has to win. Okay. Polling in Wisconsin, polling in Michigan, to me, those are the three states. If you want to look at what, the three bellwether states, it's those three states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. They were bellwether in 2016. They're going to be bellwether again in 2020. But the fact of the matter is that he's also close in places that he should be winning by 5 or 10 points, places like Georgia, places like Texas. The fact that Arizona is a swing state now does not bode well for him. So if you look at the Cook Political Report, they rate every state into, lean Democrat, strong Democrat, or a toss-up, or, lean Republican, strong Republican. If Biden just takes every state that leans his way right now, he gets 273 and wins. So he doesn't even have to win a toss-up state. He has to win 0 toss-up states to win the election today.
Yeah, and so to expound on what you're saying, I mean, I'm looking at sticking with Real Clear Politics on the same website. They have an electoral map. Yep. And they have, in Biden's camp, they have 212 electoral votes, which includes the states you think like California, Oregon, Washington, includes Virginia, which, I mean, it's easy to forget until just a few years ago was considered a swing state or even a Republican state, but Virginia is now a Democratic state. Includes New Mexico, also used to be a Republican state. Colorado also used to be a Republican state. But then the number of toss-ups is astonishing. I may put this graphic up, but here's the list of toss-up states. And by the way, they have Trump as 115 electoral votes, which is basically some of the West, some of the Mountain West, the Deep South, except for Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, South Carolina, Indiana. Those are the states that they give to Trump. But here are the toss-up states that they have on there: Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, or Missouri. People in Missouri are going to be mad if I don't say that.
Yeah.
Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, the 2nd Congressional District of Maine, because Maine splits its congressional districts, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And I mean, if you had said to somebody in the year 2000, these are going to be the toss-up states, there'd be a lot of questioning, right? Because Dr. Burge, Texas was never a toss-up state for Republicans, not in recent memory. But then also, though, frankly, Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota weren't toss-up states either. So this is a really weird map. I mean, where do you see it going? Because I don't know. It does seem as though we're kind of, maybe things are leaning towards Biden, but then, there's a lot of Trump people that would say, no, we've got it in the bag. Remember what happened, 4 years ago.
I'll say this. There's a lot of difference between 3 states that are +3 versus 3 states that are +8. When we were coming into this stretch in 2016, Clinton was leading in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania by 2 or 3 points. That's inside the margin in every state, okay? So easily, if the errors are correlated all towards Trump, then he's going to win all 3 states. When you are +7, +8, +9 in those 3 states, the chances of you winning all those 3 states are basically statistically 0 or like 1 in a million. But, Trump has to win all 3 of those states to have a chance. The fact that he's playing defense in Georgia and Texas tells you a lot. But to me, it's shocking they don't put Minnesota as a blue state. It's a toss-up state for Real Clear. It's clearly a blue state. Like, there's no way in my mind that Minnesota is going to vote for Trump in 2020. Like, that's just...
they've got Minnesota. I mean, right now, the average, they've got it as Biden +9.
Yep.
They have Wisconsin as Biden +5. They have Michigan as Biden +6.3.
Yep.
Texas, by the way, is Trump +0.2.
That's inside
the last 5. Yeah, it's inside the margin of the last 5 polls in Texas, which go back to late June. 3 had Trump ahead, and Biden was ahead in 2. I mean, but again, back in 2016, I know what some Trump supporters say, and I have read what has been said, that, of course the polls are going to be wrong again this time. And I think President Trump himself has even said that, his campaign.
Yep.
Why wouldn't that be true again in 2020? I mean, there's these questions about sampling errors and things like that, Dr. Burge.
I think it's we've gotten a lot better at polling in the last. You have to learn, like you learn on the fly. Pollsters. Here's the thing: pollsters have a reckoning every 4 years, right? Like public opinion data does not have a reckoning ever. Like pollsters have a reckoning every 4 years, and it's an election. We figured out how wrong we were, and I think what 2016 is, it humbled a lot of people who do this kind of work, realizing that errors are not statewide errors are correlated, which means that if a poll in Pennsylvania said that Hillary was up 2, but she loses by 2, that means that -4 should go across the board to every state, right? So these errors were all correlated the same direction, which is an undercount of Trump voters by, let's say, 4 points.
And why did that happen? I mean, explain why that happened.
A ton of reasons. So there was a shy Trump voter. There's some evidence there were shy Trump voters, right? There were people who were like, who said they were not going to vote for Trump, but actually when it came down to election day, did vote for Trump. There's some issues with sampling, right? So we were really switching from these online polls, or from phone polls to online polls, and it's hard to make that correction in the data, especially when broadband is not widespread yet. So you really got to be careful that you match your data to your data, because think about the people who don't have internet. It's rural people, it's people with lower levels of income and lower levels of education, which oftentimes in rural America are Republicans. So there's an undercount there, right? Things like cell phone lines versus landlines. All those things are hard problems to solve on the fly. And we realized in 2016 that we didn't do a good job solving any of those problems. And we've gotten a lot better in the last couple of years at solving those problems, okay? So I think it's those two things combined. But I also think the difference here is the margins, okay? Like I got to keep hitting on this point. +10, if you see 3 polls where Biden's +10 in a state, guess what? He's not going to lose to Trump by 2. That's just not statistically possible. If it's +3 Biden and he loses by 2 to Trump, I go, okay, that's probably inside the margin. That's not crazy. +10, +8, +7, that's a clear Biden advantage in those states. And so I think you would have to see, the polls would have to be unbelievably bad, 10 times worse than what they, and by the way, I will say this for my industry, in 2016, the national polls were exactly right. Exactly right. Look it up. They were less than 1% off nationwide in the vote. The problem is we don't elect people nationwide. We elect them state by state, which makes things 10 times harder to figure out. So we messed up in 2016, but not that bad. In the aggregate, we were really, really good. It's the state by state polls where we messed up bad.
So the other thing about 2016 is obviously you had a substantial number of people vote third party, kind of for the first time since Ross Perot came along. Over 3% voted for the Libertarian Party for Gary Johnson, 1% voted for Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, and then Evan McMullin, I don't remember what party he actually ran. I think he just ran as an independent, but
he did. Yep.
He only got 0.4% of the vote, but he got like 20-something% in Utah or something like that, where he's from. I mean, Utah has been a kind of an unusual state in terms of its. Obviously, Senator Romney voted for impeaching President Trump. So, I mean, it's, and Utah still has a fairly favorable view of Romney, as far as I know. So, I mean, it's kind of like, does that impact the election this year, the fact that there's not third-party candidates, or do you think it's not going to really have an impact?
Well, there's Kanye. He's on the ballot in Wisconsin now, apparently. He turned in his...
So do you think Kanye is really going to follow through with this thing?
I mean, he's going to be on the ballot as long as he clears the ballot challenges. I don't know if he will or not, because I've seen.
So who does Kanye impact in the race?
So a Republican lawyer actually was the one who helped him get on the ballot, which tells you that the Republican Party thinks that he's going to hurt Biden. I think that's a theory that I don't know if I believe or not empirically. Listen, here's the reality: +10, Kanye doesn't hurt you. +2, Kanye might hurt you. Right? There's a huge difference between, hey, Biden has this huge cushion. Listen, Kanye is not going to peel off 10% of the Democratic votes. He's just not going to do it. I mean, that's
so. Who's going to vote for Kanye West? Who
young kids who want to do it for the lulz, as the kids say nowadays, right? It's all about a joke. I think actually Trump won a lot of the do it for the lulz votes. I'm just going to go vote for Trump because it's funny. I really think a lot of people did that, and then they were like, oh wow, he actually won. They didn't realize it. It might actually change the election. I think Kanye gets less than 1% of the vote in most states, and I don't think he has any impact on the national race at all. I think he's a funny sort of side story. But to talk about Mormons just for a second, so Mormons are super interesting because they're Republicans, but they're not Republicans the way evangelicals are. For instance, in 2000, I mean, they're like a 75, 80% Republican vote in a typical presidential election. In 2016, only 55% of Mormons voted for Trump because a huge chunk voted for McMullen. Like you said, 20, 25% voted for McMullen, and then Hillary got like 10 or 15%. I think Mormons might actually, Utah's not going to go a blue state, but I think you're going to see Mormons only support Trump around 55, 60% again, which is a big change from what they are nationally in terms of voting for Republicans.
The most recent poll in Utah was done, survey dates May 9th through May 15th, 1,078 likely voters, KUTV, which I think is in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And it has Trump 46, Biden 40, surprisingly close.
And that was also 3 months ago too. I mean,
that was 3 months ago, and most of the polls before that, I mean, had it that Trump was ahead by double digits, you know. But I mean, it is true. Certainly, you know, the Mormon vote seems to be a little more skeptical of President Trump. So let's talk about the Sanders voters. Obviously, Bernie Sanders was, I mean, you mentioned January and how you felt like you would have graded President Trump in January. Well, in January, a lot of people thought Bernie Sanders was going to be the Democratic nominee. And so there certainly must be some residual disappointment. And I've spoken to Sanders supporters who expressed some residual disappointment. Mm-hmm. Do you think many of them will end up voting for President Trump? Or how do you feel like they're going to shake out? Or will they just stay home?
I think that 90% of them are going to vote for Biden. I think most Americans are very practical when it comes to things like this and realize if I'm a Sanders voter, I'm far to left of Biden, but I'm even farther left of Trump, right? Trump is a much worse outcome for me. Now, I do have some friends who are like, burn it down, Bernie. You know what I mean? Like, if it's not Bernie, it's Bernie or bust. Like, if it's not Bernie, I'm voting third party for a guy who's, you know, nuts, like a confirmed communist. They are few and far between, though. Most Sanders voters realize that Trump, for them, policy-wise, is way further away than Biden is. And so they'd rather have a Democrat they don't love in the White House compared to a Republican that they hate. I think that all those narratives about like, oh, can he coalesce the party? Can he bring them together during the general election? The reality is that Democrats are going to be Democrats. They're going to vote for a Democrat. And Bernie's folks are by and large just leftist Democrats who are going to come around and vote for Biden because they realize that Biden, they don't hate Biden. That's the thing about, here's what you got to realize. People hated Hillary Clinton. Hated her. Mm-hmm. And there's tons of reasons for that. Sexism is part of it. I think the Clinton name is also part of it. Benghazi and all the things that go along with that.
So hold on. Hold on. I can't let you escape that. You think there was sexism within the Democratic coalition that was against Hillary Clinton? Yeah.
I think a lot of, like the people we were just talking about in Wisconsin, like the rural, white, high school educated voter, a lot of men in those situations do harbor some sexism. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's studies that sort of bear that out too, that people sort of hold these sort of sexist, kind of latent sexist views. I think that hurt her. I think now, can you extricate all the Clinton stuff from the fact she's a woman? I don't know if you can do that, but I do think her being a woman hurt her in the general election. How much? I don't know, but I think the data is clear that it hurt her. Here's the thing. During the Tulsa rally, I saw this great reporter went and talked to a guy selling T-shirts on the street around the convention center. Mm-hmm. And he said, I got all these anti-Biden shirts, Sleepy Joe, and yada, yada, yada. And he said, I can't sell any of these shirts, but those Hillary Clinton shirts over there are selling like hotcakes. And this is 2020. She's not been running for office for 4 years now. And the hatred for her still sticks around. I think the problem that Trump has with Biden is he has a hard time boxing him in like he did with Hillary. There's no attack line that sticks to Biden as well as every attack line stuck with Hillary. And I think that really is to the Democrats' advantage. I think Bernie would have been hated by a lot of people on the right. Biden is just sort of, we don't love him, but we don't hate him like we hated Clinton or Sanders or anybody else. So I think in a lot of ways, he's the ideal candidate for this time for the Democratic Party.
Is it fair to compare Joe Biden with maybe previous candidates from both parties who were, Sleepy Joe obviously is a more of a polemical tagline, right? But is it fair to say that Joe Biden is kind of a standard bearer who is, as inoffensive as possible, or is he a defined candidate? I mean, I think about people like Bob Dole in 1996, or George H.W. Bush in 1998, oh gosh, I mean, going back, I suppose Dwight Eisenhower would have been kind of that way, right? I mean, people they were just really inoffensive, and then for whatever reason, they were there for the time. Although a guy like Bob Dole obviously lost, whereas Clinton was pretty defined. I mean, is he just kind of people cast their own aspirations onto him and say he must agree with me, or what is Biden's thing in terms of how you see it as a political science? Do you feel like scientist? I mean, do you feel like he's well defined in some way that maybe certain people on the left recognize, or is his strength that he's not maybe so well defined?
I think his strength is he's sort of like a replacement level Democrat. He's like he doesn't.
What do you mean by that? What do you
so there's a term in baseball called WAR, which is wins above replacement, which is how good you are compared to the average player. Okay. Right, just like the most vanilla hitter, runner, fielder, like you're just average in every possible way. I think in many ways Biden is average in every possible way, which is perfect for Trump, like the perfect foil against Trump, right? Because Trump wants you to be bombastic, wants you to be extreme on something, wants you to have some huge, and Biden doesn't. He has scandals in his past, but none really stick, like the Clinton conspiracy and the Benghazis and all the stuff that goes along with that. I think that he's the perfect, just generic old white dude who's sort of left of center, but not too far. And honestly, if he starts talking about like when his wife died in a car crash back when he got elected to the Senate in 1970, right, and when he talks about his son Bo dying and all the terrible things, the grief that he went through, I think that guy comes across as very human, and it's very hard to attack that because it's like you like him. You just like him as and I know that's like you can't like quantify likability, but Joe has that. Like he does not polarize people. Even Lindsey Graham, who is a big Trump supporter, said, "I will not attack Joe Biden. He's one of the best people, best human beings I've ever met," which tells you a lot in this partisan time that a Republican will say that about a Democrat, especially during such a heated election cycle that we're in right now. I just think that he has the ability to humanize himself and be so likable that very few people are turned off by him completely the way that a lot of candidates do turn off a small portion of the population. He just does not do that. Now, I will say this. He doesn't really get anybody excited, though, either. There's a very small portion of the electorate. He's not Obama. You know what I mean? He doesn't have this huge goose base that's like, yes, let's vote, let's vote, let's vote. It's, okay, we're going to vote for that guy because he's not that guy.
Well, and so I think that's kind of the premise of there's this model, this political scientist, I forget the gentleman's name, who has the primary model, and it has something to do with the number of people that show up for primaries, I think. And he says it's correctly predicted all but like 2 of the last 100 years of presidential elections or something like that. I mean, how does that bear out? I mean, so maybe there's not a lot that you can attack Vice President Biden with, per se, or that's not going to have a big public impact. But what about this whole thing that, maybe people aren't excited either. They just stay home, and then Trump supporters are much more fervent and excited. And that certainly continues to seem to be a phenomenon, that there are many Trump supporters that are very enthusiastic about voting for president.
Yeah, I think negative partisanship is the term we want to talk about right now, which is negative partisanship is not the idea that you vote for a candidate. It's that you vote against the other one. Okay. So I think what Biden has going for him is not positive partisanship. It's negative partisanship. People are going to vote for Biden because they hate Donald Trump. They think that he's a menace to society. He's, destroyed the country. He's mishandled COVID. He says stuff that like in interviews, he looks completely incoherent sometimes. I think that is why people vote for Biden. Very few people vote for Biden because like, yay, Joe Biden. They vote for Biden because he's not Trump. Right. And I think that kind of enthusiasm is the anti-Trump enthusiasm is as large as the pro-Trump enthusiasm, if not larger. And I think that's how Biden skates through, is by being not Trump. So again, replacement level, right? He doesn't have to stand out any way. The way he stands out is by not being that guy. And he's very good about not. And listen, his whole campaign strategy's been the last couple of months, hide.
Well, that's true. I was going to ask you, I mean, it seems like like Biden has not been I mean, granted, I don't watch really, I don't watch TV news, frankly, much at all, very rarely. But it doesn't seem like he's out there a lot. I
No.
mean,
If a guy's digging a hole, don't distract him.
hmm.
Like just hand him another shovel, dude. Keep on digging. And
So what you're saying, the Biden campaign's calculated that Trump is causing himself electoral damage, and then they just
absolutely. And I think the polls bear that out. He has not narrowed the gap at all. COVID's raging, right? The death tolls are going up and up and up. The economy's sort of sputtering right now. The stock market's good, but the economy as a whole is as bad as it's been in my lifetime, from unemployment, things like that. I mean, all these indicators are going down. Don't give yourself gaffes. Don't open yourself up to criticism. Just hide. Do one speech a week. Do a public appearance here or there, and let Trump keep going, because he did an interview with Axios this week that was an absolute, unmitigated, objective disaster. I mean, in every possible way. And so that is exactly what you want. The best campaign ad is that interview running over and over again. So don't step on that coverage. Let Trump dig himself, keep digging that hole, and he's doing a great job. If I was a Trump campaign, I'd say get that guy off TV right now.
So how much? So how much impact? I mean, at this moment, and I hope that he doesn't announce it in the next hour, because then this will be kind of old stuff. At this moment, he hasn't decided on his vice president. How much does that matter? I mean, let's say it's Susan Rice. I mean, she certainly has some potential liability, right? Some stories there, and then there was this congresswoman from California, and forgive me, I forget.
Bass.
Pardon me.
Bass. I don't know. I can't remember.
Karen Bass.
Karen Bass. That's
yeah.
it.
So she. I saw an interview with her on Meet the Press, and Chuck Todd was pressing her about past statements she made about Castro, which certainly, South Florida is a lot of Cubans who hate Castro. So I mean, how much liability could if Biden is like, let's say, this milquetoast kind of candidate that just kind of attracts the whole Democratic coalition to vote against Trump by voting for him? How much liability does a vice presidential candidate have for Biden, or is it going to be an issue? Kind of, could he choose whoever he wants? I mean, he keeps saying he's going to choose a woman of color, but who do you think it really matters who he chooses?
Okay, so the political science answer is probably it doesn't matter, right? In most cases, it doesn't matter. Like, for instance, Romney picking Paul Ryan didn't matter. Hillary Clinton picking Tim Kaine didn't matter. Obama picking Biden didn't matter.
But obviously some candidates believe it does matter, because like McCain chose Palin on a, and
that's where I was going next. Okay. So in some cases, extreme choices do matter, and almost always they hurt you more than they help you. Okay. The narrative around McCain goes, he knew he was behind at that time, which he was, but not by a lot, when he picked Sarah Palin, because the economy started tanking because of the mortgage crisis and all that stuff. So he needed a long shot. He wanted a woman. He had a hard time finding a good, qualified, electric type woman. And Sarah Palin bounced out of nowhere as the governor of Alaska. It was really interesting and sort of vibrant. And they're like, she's a good choice. Right. She ended up being completely unready to take the stage, right? I mean, she was just objectively not a good.
Regardless of what someone thinks of Sarah Palin, whether they like her or do not like her, it is a fact that McCain had only met her like one time, I think.
Exactly.
Kind of like a total unknown to him. And then I think met him, and it was a very political choice, obviously.
It was. And she was, by everyone who handled her as well, said this subsequently, she was just not prepared for national and international questions about policy, because she was the governor of Alaska. Had only been there for a couple of years.
But then on the other hand, I mean, in terms of like George W. Bush, I mean, he ended up choosing Dick Cheney, who was like, nobody knew who Dick Cheney was. I mean,
that's true.
In the HW administration, and it ended up not being, I don't think, a pro or a minus, just
no. But I think that's the choice. That's the default choice, is someone like Dick Cheney, right? If I was Biden, I'd pick the replacement level vice presidential candidate too, right? A person who is not offensive, or is literally, who has no attack line.
But who would that be? Like, what would somebody like? I mean, give us some specific names. Dr. Ryan Burge, you've been put in charge of the Biden presidential campaign selection committee, and you have dictatorial power to choose.
Yeah, it's Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. Junior senator from Illinois is the choice.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Not just because I'm from Illinois, but I think she checks a lot of boxes. She's a woman, obviously. She's Asian, so checks, a woman of color. She was a veteran in the military, lost both her legs in a helicopter crash in Iraq. Right. So she checks that box too. But also policy-wise, she's not really far to the left. She's really hard to attack, right? Like, I don't know how you attack a woman like Tammy Duckworth in a meaningful way. And I think she's non-offensive, right? That's exactly what we're looking for right now, is someone who's not very offensive. I don't think any of these choices, whether it's, Muriel Bowser or, whoever it is, right? London Breed from DC or whoever you're going to pick, right? Kamala Harris or Susan Rice or, Val Demings. I've heard all these names floated. I don't think any of them win you anything, or any of you lose them. They don't lose you anything in a substantive way. So you pick a very generic candidate who's hard to attack and who won't take the spotlight away from Trump and his gaffes. Tammy Duckworth's your choice because she checks all the boxes and she doesn't have any major scandals. Even Kamala Harris has some issues. She was far left on policy and she was bad on crime, which a lot of Democrats don't like right now. So Tammy Duckworth's my choice. I think she's a safe choice. She doesn't hurt you. She doesn't help you. And she moves the ball forward.
Well, we'll find out pretty soon. I mean, I doubt they would announce the pick on a Friday, which is tomorrow, but it could be as soon as perhaps, Monday this coming week. And I mean, it's got to be soon. I mean, you can't go that long without picking someone. We're getting late into the season. Let me ask you this question, Doctor. If Mario Cuomo, a lot of people got really hot on the idea of Mario Cuomo somehow jumping in and becoming Mario Cuomo.
Andrew Cuomo.
Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah.
Mario Cuomo, I think, was his father, right?
His father.
So,
right?
Whoops. Okay. Also showing my age. I mentioned Seinfeld earlier and then Mario Cuomo. So, Andrew Cuomo. Whose dad was the governor of New York also. But Andrew Cuomo has gotten all these plaudits from a lot of people, even some on the right in his own state, that, he's got this leadership, this gravitas kind of thing. He was really straightforward during the height of when the pandemic was its worst and all this. I mean, and there were a lot of people saying, well, man, if only he could be, the Democratic nominee. There were some Democratic pundits saying this. I mean, what would be the difference if Andrew Cuomo was the Democratic nominee? Would it make a difference to have somebody like that? Because clearly he would be more bombastic. He would be more, blunt and so forth. Definitely would match up with President Trump on the rhetorical, battle. But would he be a liability, someone like that? I mean, or what do you think?
I don't think he does as well as Biden does. I don't know what he gets you that Biden doesn't get you, to say it a different way, right? Like, I don't see what his advantage is because he's New York liberal. Like, come on. Rural Wisconsin doesn't care about that. I will say this, his press conferences during COVID were actually kind of interesting, compelling. He's an interesting, straight talking, no nonsense kind of guy, but he made a huge mistake, which is he packed a lot of people into extended care facilities, like retirement homes in New York, and killed probably 6,000 people unnecessarily, which would hang over his head for this whole, the whole campaign would be about, he killed a bunch of old people.
That's quite a charge, Dr. Burge. So
that's what the media, the right-wing media said against him, a lot of
interesting. Okay.
So but I guess the retort he would say is, I didn't know any different, guys. I was handling this without any information because I hit first. So I was flying blind from day.
I mean, frankly, it's hard to see very many governors coming out of the COVID thing unscathed. I mean, everyone.
Oh no, it's hurt everybody.
I mean, here in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott is, I mean, he was, opening the state up, and now he's requiring, masks and allowing, local governments to kind of choose what they wanted. It's very difficult, I think, for any governor to really sail through this thing and keep the same position or whatever. Cuomo, to be fair, had, I think, a mixed approval rating before all of this started, but he kind of was kind of reincarnated with all this. So let's just kind of go here. I mean, if you are Donald Trump's campaign manager, and knowing what you know, and knowing how people vote and how they voted in 2016 and where they're going and where they're moving and so forth, how do you win the election for President Donald Trump? And then I'm going to ask about Biden after this, so that people know that we're not stacking the deck. But at this point, I want to ask you, because you've made it sound like it's going to be challenging for President Trump, and it sounds like you're saying it's leaning against him. How do you win the election for Donald Trump?
I think you have to come up with a comprehensive plan for COVID that makes sense, right? we're going to increase testing to 10 million tests a day. We're not anywhere close to that. We're doing like 700,000 tests a day right now. And we're going to have make that happen, right? Do things like PPE. We're going to have a national center that handles PPE. We're going to, Trump has to become more disciplined. Like that, to me, that is his greatest weakness is his campaign staff can't tell him what to do. because he'll just fire off a tweet that totally derails the entire week of messaging. He has to hit on COVID, right? Saying, here's what we're going to do in the next 30 days, the next 60 days, the next 90 days against
But you're
COVID.
talking about, I mean, but hold on, doctor, but you're talking about policy changes
Yes.
that potentially, I mean, isn't it late for that? I mean, at this point, isn't
Yes.
it all messaging? I mean, isn't it too late for someone to announce big policy changes? I mean, 3 months before the election and it not seem like a totally political move?
Yeah, but you got another choice. I mean, you should have done this 6 months ago.
You think that's the only choice that the Trump campaign has?
Yeah, I think so. I think COVID has exposed all the fears that a lot of people had about Trump. He can kind of keep the boat steady as everything was going okay and the economy was growing and we weren't having many major crises. But when we had, a really serious crisis, I don't know if any president could have handled it well. He's handled it poorly. I mean, I think you would have, unless you talk to a MAGA person, they're going to tell you he did not handle this very well for a bunch of reasons. Dude didn't wear a mask until a couple weeks ago. I mean, to me, that's inexplicable. Like, I cannot understand that in any way, shape, or form. I'm telling you, Mitt Romney was president, he would have been wearing a mask from as soon as CDC recommended it, that dude been wearing a mask. He got, he would follow the rules because he understands he's a symbol and he wants to project good behavior. Trump does not. I think that kind of gaffe is something that's unforgivable for a lot of moderate voters in America. I really do think Trump has dug himself so deep of a hole, he's going to have a really hard time getting out. But if you could come up with a concrete, he said, did you know this 2 weeks ago? He said, I'm going to have a healthcare policy I'm going to roll out in 2 weeks. A healthcare policy is going to roll out in 2 weeks. It never showed up. Like, he's got to stop doing stuff like that. Don't promise. Just all of a sudden one day have a big press conference and have, here's my 90-day plan for COVID. Here's exactly what we're going to do. Here's measurable benchmarks. Here's what you're going to see in infection rates. Here's what we're going to see in death rates. Here's how many ventilators we're going to have. Here's how much PPE we're going to have. Like, here's how much testing we're going to do. He's got to stop talking about we're doing too much testing. Like, all that messaging just comes across as dumb, to be completely blunt. He's got to stop talking that way. The unfortunate thing is the dude is not disciplined as a candidate. And that's the number one thing you want as a campaign manager. You want that candidate to say the same thing to that question every single time in the exact same way. He cannot do that. And
although, I mean, to be fair, I think any Trump supporter is going to say that's why he won in 2016. He said what we're thinking and all this, kind of thing. I mean, isn't there some truth to that?
I do think so, but I think he used to be able to be a little bit more subtle, and now he's just being so overt. He said if Democrats get elected, they're going to ban Christianity. Like, he said that point blank, which is just ludicrous. I mean, from an objective standpoint, is ludicrous. He said he could institute a stimulus check by executive order 2 days ago. That's ludicrous. You can't say Obama became a dictator because of executive order, and then Trump is going to basically abuse the power to give people money, which, by the way, is going to balloon the deficit. I mean, come on. Like, at some point, he used to be better about saying things more subtly that was not so pointed. He's got to stop doing that, and he's got to stop stepping on his own feet. I think so sometimes the thing that gets you there is not the thing that keeps you there. Okay. And the thing that got him into the presidency is not going to keep him in the presidency. People have gotten tired of this, song and dance, dog and pony show. And I think this crisis has exposed all that as much as possible. So I think that he's stuck. That's my opinion there.
Okay. So if you are Biden's campaign manager, what do you do to make sure that he wins the presidency?
Stay in the basement.
Really?
Yeah, no, as much as possible.
Trap Joe Biden in the basement and don't let him out, huh?
Yeah, trap Joe Biden in the basement. Don't let him out. Make a few, because if you don't make a speech, you don't make a gaffe. If you don't take questions, you don't make a gaffe. If you don't get in trouble like this, you're going to keep you want to keep the spotlight on Trump as much as you can, because he's doing your work for you. And at the end, the last 30 days, take your $500 million war chest and just carpet bomb the internet with Lincoln Project ads. That gets under Trump's skin so bad because it's a bunch of
Lincoln Project, to be clear. So you're talking about Kellyanne Conway's husband's group that is Republicans against Trump.
Exactly. And boy, they are so good at like digging and just poking at Trump. Let them run the campaign.
It's a very aggressive campaign, to be sure.
It really is. And you know what? It comes across as more genuine than like a far left group, right? So let them run your ads, let them be your messaging, and just hang back. Now the debates are interesting, right? How are you going to play the debates?
Because the debates. Well, so then I want to ask you, so Nassim Taleb is I think a hedge fund guy, and he has this concept of black swans, right?
Yep.
And in fact, I would say that from what I read, there is a black swan hedge fund that cleaned up on coronavirus by betting against the market, right? And then it's like every now and then you're going to have some big event that's going to tank the market. Well, let's say there's a black swan event that happens. The first one that comes to mind for me is, and you hate to even say this, but something happens to Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And
Yeah.
let's say that happens. Could that affect the election in Trump's favor? I mean, you hate to prognosticate about a person, their life, or just their health, or just having to retire, or whatever. But she just recently, it was announced, had to go back to the hospital for cancer. And so, there have been a lot of articles about this. What do you think about that, Dr. Burge? Do people care about that issue enough to vote on it? I mean, certainly it seems like it had an impact in 2016.
So I'm going to be completely honest with you. The thing that keeps me up at night is Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying. Especially, let's say Biden wins the election, okay, in November, first week in November. She dies like around Thanksgiving, okay? Will the Republican Party try to cram through a Republican replacement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the lame duck session? To me, that runs a cold chill up my spine, because that is the kind of stuff that rips democracies apart. Because, with Merrick Garland, okay, the guy who Obama nominated to take over for Scalia, but Mitch McConnell said, we're not going to hear this because it's an election year. And we want
in 2018, Scalia.
2016.
I'm sorry, 2016. So Scalia died in like March of
Yep.
2016, I think, or in February, and Merrick Garland was nominated. He was a little bit seen as more of a centrist judge, I think, by some, which is, there was a hope that he could be approved. But then you're saying Majority Leader McConnell said, we're not going to do it this year.
Exactly, because it's an election year. We're going to let the people decide. And that was in March. Let's say Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies after the election and Biden's going to be president in January. My worry is the Republican Party says, well, our last gasp is we're going to cram through a nominee right now that's going to be a rightist Republican to replace a left justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and change the court for literally decades. That rips democracy apart. And I hope, and my prayer is.
Well, what do you mean by that rips democracy apart? I mean,
what it does, it
explain
says
what that means. I mean, are you talking like civil strife?
Yes.
Like what?
Yes. I think there would be a large, active, angry amount of civil unrest in this country, where the liberals in America today would say the Republican Party doesn't care about anything else but winning. They don't care about democracy. They don't care about the good of the country. They don't care about what it means for fairness and equality. They care about winning. And if that's all they care about, we are going to tear this whole thing down. I mean, democracy only works if both parties at some level agree that the thing we care about first and foremost is democracy staying coherent and cohesive over our party winning all the time. And we've moved into a territory where I don't think that's true for some partisans on both sides of the aisle. And I think that's incredibly toxic for American democracy. I think if Ruth Bader Ginsburg gets replaced by someone in December, that is probably the most catastrophic event that's happened to American democracy, at least in my lifetime, and at least going back 75 years, to the Great Depression at least. Because
you think people would what? I mean, would there?
Yeah.
I don't want to be laughable, but do you think that would be like enough to start civil conflict? I mean,
I don't know what it would look like beyond the fact that I think that so then you would have war. And what I mean by war is, here's the best case scenario. The Democrats take office. Let's say they win the Senate too, to make everything even more dramatic. They win the majority in the Senate and Biden wins the House. Then the first thing they do is they add 5 justices to the Supreme Court of the United States, and they're all left-leaning, young Democrat jurists.
Well, FDR wanted to pack the court.
He did. But you know what happened? The Senate realized that was a bad idea, and so a couple of them switched on the Supreme Court so that his policies would get pushed through, so they didn't have to have this catastrophic change to the court. That's what you have to have. You have to have some Republicans who stand up and go, no. This is not about us winning right now. This is about what's right. And what's right is we wait until the people get seated in January, and we, go through the nomination process at that point, the way in my mind. And by the way, I would say the exact same thing. It was flipped. This is not a leftist thing for me. Okay. For democracy's sake, they should not replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg at all if she dies in the next 6 months, but especially during the lame duck session. I think that's a terrible precedent for American democracy, because then the Democrats would say, okay, filibuster, that's gone. Okay, we're going to cram everything through because we're 51-49. We're going to put in 5 more justices. We're going to triple the national debt. We're going to, we're going to do all these things basically because we're going to hurt you as bad as we can for as long as we can. And the other party says in response, oh, just wait till we get in power and we're going to do the same thing to you. That's not how democracy works. It's not how it should work. And I think it's really dangerous for the future of democracy if that's exactly what happens.
So what happens if something were to occur to Ruth Bader Ginsburg before the election? Would that shift the map? Would that shift the calculation substantially?
I don't think so. I mean, it might get Trump closer. Okay, I will say that. It might get Trump closer, but I think his messaging needs to be, if I get reelected, here's who my nominee is going to be. Not, I'm going to cram somebody through in 2 weeks. Like, that's not what needs to happen, okay? I think that he could pick up a couple points because that's where a lot of never Trump Republicans become Trump Republicans when it comes to, Supreme Court especially. He might pick up some people there. I don't think that's the black swan event that could really tilt the election. In my estimation, the thing that really could tilt it towards Trump is,
what could tilt the election from you believe it's stacked against, so to review,
Yes.
you believe it's stacked against Trump at this point, but what could tilt it?
A vaccine that is proved to be efficacious and safe, and there's enough doses that could get to enough people before election day that could begin to open the country back up, and the stock market begins to rally in a really significant way. Unemployment begins to drop in a really significant way. Now, my worry about that is, though, there's no way that the FDA could approve a vaccine by October. That would
well, wait a minute. Like, if you're let's say that you're trying to implement that strategy, why couldn't President Trump just, or any president in this position, just say like a week before election day, hey, we've got a vaccine? I mean, who can prove that?
I think you would actually have to see it, but here's what Trump's fighting against, though. New poll came out today, said 10% of Democrats wouldn't take a vaccine and 40% of Republicans wouldn't take the vaccine.
Really?
Yes. So there's so much resistance in his own party. So if a vaccine comes out, only 40% of Republicans are like, wait, I'm not going to take it anyway. Why do I care? Right? So I think that tamps down the bump that he could get from a vaccine.
Do you think, by the way, do you think 40% of Republicans are against vaccinations, or is it this specifically?
This one specifically. Yeah, I think this one specifically. I think Republicans generally are opposed to government telling them what to do, but I think if we get in a situation where it's like you can't go back to work until you get the vaccine, I think you're going to see a refusal, right? I think it's anti-government as much as, but I think there has been a lot of anti-science. I think COVID has really made people more hesitant and less trustworthy of science because they've seen science happening in real time. And in the beginning, science is mushy. We go back and forth on how to treat people, how COVID works. We don't know, blah, blah, blah. It goes back and forth. Usually that happens behind closed doors, but because COVID's such on the national conscience, we're seeing that happen every single day in the national media, and it's making people lose confidence in science when really this is the way science always works. We just don't see it 90% of the time.
Oh my goodness. There's so many different things that we could, I feel like I could talk to you for like 10 hours, but that would be a really long podcast, Dr. Burge. So at some point we have to kind of wrap this up. And ultimately, ultimate question, who's going to win the election?
Biden.
How much?
I think he wins the Electoral College close to 300 electoral votes. That's
really,
I think he wins. I won't say comfortably, but it's not going to be it's not going to be a Bush Gore type of situation. Okay. It's not going to come down to one state. He's probably going to win by 2 or 3 states, 4 states, maybe 30 electoral votes. He'll win. Now, the issue that I think your audience should be tempered to know is a lot of people are voting by mail this year. Okay. Mm-hmm. Which means it's going to take a lot longer to count the votes.
I was going to ask you about that because the mail-in balloting is really, that's becoming a pretty hot issue all by itself. And it seems, it seems obviously more Republicans are concerned about it, but it also seems that there are even maybe some on the left that are a little bit concerned in some ways about mail. What's the deal with mail-in balloting? Who's in favor of it? Who's against it? Do you think it makes a difference?
I think here's what Trump has been talking so negatively about it for so long, fraud and abuse and yada, yada, yada. The data says there's almost no voter fraud in America today. It's as rare as can possibly be. It's all the voter ID stuff is a solution looking for a problem. Voter ID is not a problem in America today. That's not me saying that. That's what the data says. Here's what's interesting. Trump 2 days ago tweeted, hey, Florida voters, ask for a mail-in ballot. It's safe there. We know it's safe there. because he's been hearing reports that Republicans are requesting a lot less mail-in and absentee ballots than Democrats are because they think it's rife with fraud, so they don't want to use it. So that's made the Trump team
Oh,
nervous.
wow. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's actually had a backfire effect against his people. And he's actually trying to hedge against that by saying, in Florida, it's safe, which actually, that makes no sense. Like, if it's either safe or it's not. You know what I mean? There's no, like, Utah is a red state. It does mail-in voting. Like, and the Republican Secretary of State in Utah says, what's the deal? Like, we have no problems with mail-in voting. It's very secure. Don't worry about it, right? So this is Trump being weird Trump. The part of the Republican Party that I have a hard time with, and on some policies, I lean right. I really, truly do, on certain economic policies especially. Here's what I don't get about the Republican Party. They spend an inordinate amount of their time trying to make it harder for people to vote in this country. And I don't understand that. As a political scientist, it makes zero sense to me empirically. For instance, in Wisconsin, the legislature passed a law that hasn't gone into effect yet because it got challenged constitutionally, that made it a crime for you to pay for transportation for someone else to go to the polls on voting day. They wanted to make that a crime, a misdemeanor to do that, to create an organized caravan of people to get people to the polls. Why? Why are we trying to make it harder in this country to vote? We know that in countries where fewer people vote, they feel like government represents them less and they feel more disaffected and misaligned from their government. Okay. If you want to talk about civil unrest, that's how you get civil unrest. Apathy is what we should be fighting against in this country, and making the franchise easier is what we should be trying to do. Things like Motor Voter, where you can register at the DMV, was a great step forward. Automatic voter registration should be the law of the land in this country. Okay. We should not be making it harder to vote in America. We should be making it easier. Period. And that to me is non-negotiable. Florida, this is, as a Christian, I'm going to preach just for a second, okay?
All right. Okay, Pastor Burge now.
Yeah, Pastor Burge. In Florida, it used to be the law that if you committed a felony, you were disqualified from voting for the rest of your life. Even after you served all your time, all your parole, and you had been out of prison for 20 years, you could never vote again. So you get caught selling weed when you're 18. When you're 68, you're still being punished for that. Okay. They had a ballot initiative in 2018. Over 60% of voters in Florida voted to repeal that part of the legislation, saying once you've served your time and done your parole, then you should be able to have the vote. The legislature of Florida said, wait a minute, you have to pay all your fines and fees before you get the right to vote again. And guess what? Most of those people can never pay their fines and fees off because they have to pay to be in prison in Florida. Okay. I mean, basically what the Florida legislature said is, yeah, we don't care what the people think. We don't care. And as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, you know what I believe in? Forgiveness and redemption. Okay. What you did when you're 18 should not matter a hill of beans. If you serve your time to society, should not be impacting you when you're 65 years old. That is
I had an interview with Mark Levin, who is on the right. Yeah. He works for Texas Public Policy Foundation and Right on Crime Initiative. But he's respected by people on both the right and the left, and is a criminal justice reformer. And he explained in pretty substantial detail in that interview how certain people with lower socioeconomic status, and that does disproportionately affect people of color, kind of get stuck in that system because then they can't pay bail, and then they lose their job, and then so on and so forth, and have worse representation, these kinds of things. And so it certainly is a bipartisan issue, I think, to give people a second chance. There seems to be a lot of bipartisan maybe support for that. Let me ask you.
Mike Huckabee, let me give you one quote I always love to throw out right now. Mike Huckabee, who I don't agree with on a lot of things, and I agree with him on this. He goes, we put people away that we're mad at, but we're not afraid of. That's what our prison system has become. People we're mad at, but are not dangerous to society. And we should stop doing that for ethical reasons, for Christian reasons, but also for financial reasons, because it costs a ton of money to keep people in prison for no good reason. So there's my criminal justice reform. We should do it now.
And I mean, to be fair, President Trump did, pass a law that started down that path. Although Mark had told me that it wasn't a huge reform, but there was some reform with that. I mean, obviously, that's for whatever reason, it's hard to get criminal justice reform done, even with the weird, amount of support that it seems to have from everybody. So last question I'm going to ask you, and then we
Mhm.
will need to wrap it up because I think we'll just need to keep having conversations, Dr. Burge.
Sure.
You're just too interesting with all this data. So what happens if, I mean, President Trump has talked about the possibility of delaying the election.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's really something that is an actual idea, or if it's just kind of like, questioning the veracity of mail-in balloting. But how
Mhm.
do you, I mean, what's your comment on that? What do you think about that? What do political science professors think about that? I've read a lot of constitutional law professors writing on actually varieties of opinions just about that particular comment. So what do you
Yeah.
think on that?
So there's a law passed by Congress in 1845. They set the date. President can't set the date. Congress has to change the date if they're going to change the date. And this Congress has made it exceedingly clear, Republicans and Democrats, that they're not changing the date. I mean, I think Trump floated that as a trial balloon to see if the Republican Party would bite on that. And they clearly did not bite on that. I mean, remember the governor of New Hampshire, Sununu, who's a Republican, said, we are going to vote on November 3rd, end of story. Like that is as clear as you can possibly be. We're not changing the date, dude. Like, I know that I think Trump kind of rolls an idea into the room and see what happens, see how it's picked up and who likes it, who doesn't. Boy, that one landed with a big old thud. No one picked up on that. No one of any, credibility in Congress believes in that idea. The election is going to happen on November 3rd, come hell or high water, or COVID or mail-in or whatever it takes. We're going to have an election on November 3rd, which, by the way, from a democratic theory standpoint, is exactly what should happen. I mean, we should not be we voted during World War II. We voted during the Depression, right? We voted in the worst parts of American history. We voted during the Civil War on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. We got to vote on the first. You got to hold something sacred in this country, and that's one of those things. By the way, Illinois passed a law. It is a state holiday now. Election day is a state holiday now. So we all get off work. All state employees get off work on November 3rd this year. And, that'll actually drive up votes. And something we should do nationwide, by the way. We should make voting a national holiday to get people out to the polls and not have an impediment where they have to go to work and can't vote. That should never be a reason why you can't vote, because you have to work. That's ridiculous in America, and we should do everything we can to make it easier in this country to vote, and that's a great way to do it. So
that's an interesting idea. I wonder what that would do to turnout. I mean,
it'll probably go up a little bit. So, I mean, we're not talking like, you wouldn't like bring Trump.
Most people still don't care, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly.
If you make it a holiday, they'll probably just go to the beach or grill, hot dogs or something like that. So.
Well, it is November, so northern people are going to be bundled up for sure.
Bundled up watching YouTube for 4 to 6 hours a day. Right.
So a lot of people ask me this question: what would happen if everybody voted? Like we made mandatory voting in this country. Brazil did that at one point, 20 years ago. The number of ballots that were spoiled, which means were mismarked in some way that made them ineligible to be counted, went up dramatically because illiterate people had to vote or they got fined. Right. So you don't want that. I don't think you want mandatory voting in this country. And the reality is, it actually wouldn't matter. There's actually been statistical models that looked at this idea. What if everybody voted in America? And the reality is, Democrats would do slightly better, but it probably would affect very few races because so few races in Congress today are close. Are within 2 or 3 points.
Right.
Only help in those races, and those are when the Democrat was behind.
So, are you saying that state legislators draw congressional districts to favor certain parties? That is a radical idea.
Unbelievable. Which, by the way, I'm using an algorithm to make maps too, an unbiased, objective algorithm to make these maps, or hire a team of people like me who are nonpartisan, objective map makers and try to meet the criteria. And it has to be approved by both parties, right? I think partisan maps are one of the worst things that are happening. I don't think it drives down turnout, by the way, or it's not the reason we're polarizing, but it sure as heck has not helped polarization in this country that maps drawn on partisan lines. I think, again, going back to the idea of democratic theory, that kind of stuff is bad for democratic theory. We have to believe democracy is legitimate. And that's one of the reasons we don't think it's legitimate, is because of partisan map making and, things like lame duck Supreme Court nominees would be another reason.
Well, I'm smiling if somebody's watching this, because gerrymandering is such a bipartisan. I mean, both parties do it. I mean,
100%.
But one of my favorites was in Texas. There was a district that like stretched all the way down to South Texas, and then the
Uh-huh.
media named they called it the fajita strip, and I still remember that. I just think I don't know, just I love it when they come with these
Oh,
names. But
I spend a whole hour and a half in my Congress class talking about gerrymandering as an idea, the concept, where it came from, and how it's evolved over time. And there are some districts that are literally a block wide for about 16 blocks. And
oh, sure, yeah. I mean, and in Texas, obviously that favors Republicans now. I mean, I
yeah,
suppose if the state legislature were to change, but like in California, it favors Democrats, and
sure.
in Massachusetts, and places like that. I mean, you're not seeing Republicans get elected in Western Massachusetts, which is a pretty conservative part of the state because
Mm-hmm.
of gerrymandering, right, and
Yep.
these kinds of things. So it's everybody does it, and well, Dr. Burge, it's hard to say that encores can ever be as good as the original, but this was pretty close. You are a phenomenal guest, and I will certainly have you back if you will put up with me again.
Sure.
Before we go, what would you like to say, if anything, to the folks listening or watching this? Anything else you want to say?
Plug time. You can follow me on
Plug
Twitter
time.
at Ryan Burge, RyanBurge. You can. My website is ryanburge.net. I blog at religioninpublic.blog, and I have a book coming out March 3rd of 2021 called The Nuns, N-O-N-E-S. Where
Oh
they
yes, you mentioned this last time. So how much farther along? Do you have a manuscript now that's submitted, or?
Yep. It was due May 1st. They had the manuscript is done. It's going for copy editing. I'll be doing that in the next month or so. Cover design is done. We are on track for a March 3rd, 2021 publishing date. That's the day the book will drop, as the kids say. It's the nuns, where they came from, who they are, and where they're going. It's just about the religiously unaffiliated in America from a social science perspective, written for Christians, written for a general audience anyway, but kind of nudged towards Christians, like learning how to reach out to this kind of group, what they are sociologically, demographically, and these kind of things. It's about 30,000 words, so not a really long book, about 150 pages, but it's got over 45 graphs, so really data heavy. It's really a handbook for people who are interested in religious unaffiliation in America. And I think it fit really well in like a world religions class. If you want to spend a week talking about the nuns, it'd be a great place to start to give you a good handle on who they are. So that's coming out March 3rd, 2021.
Fascinating. I mean, I think your next book after that should be like one of those coffee table like photography books, but just your graphs, like maybe like 200 pages of graphs. Like if somebody walks into a house and sees that on a coffee table, they're gonna say, "This person is really dorky." Because I would have that.
I would love that. I mean, I'm so bummed that my graphs would be black and white for the book. I'm like, can they please be color? Like, no, it'd be so much money to make a color.
It'd be
book.
expensive.
So,
oh yeah.
yeah. So like, I can't even make color, which really bums me out. So hopefully in the future, I do get to do something like that. I would love to do something like that.
But people can see your graphs at Ryan Burge on.
That's the hub.
Twitter.
That's where everything starts and finishes.
It is certainly the viral jumping off point for a lot of what you do. Dr. Ryan Burge, professor at Eastern Illinois University, American Baptist pastor, writer, grapher, a lot of other things. Thank you so much for joining me again on the show.
Thanks, Jess. Appreciate it.
And that was Dr. Ryan Burge, pastor and professor of political science at Eastern Illinois University. If you like the show, please remember to subscribe on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app, and tell your friends. If you've got a guest idea, email me, jessfieldshow@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.